B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Friday, April 27th, 2018. And this is rare for me, but I was moved to tears as I prepared today's podcast and read the descriptions of the historic meeting in the Peace House at Panmunjon at the 38th parallel that separates South Korea from its northern neighbor. And I know this is all about optics, and there's a lot of hope that's in the air, but even if this doesn't lead to a peace treaty and the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, as we are now being led to expect, this is still a day of historic proportions. As you may know, I turned 65 last week. The Korean War is older than I am, and it remains unresolved, unclosed. And in the historic meeting between President Moon of South Korea and Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, they agreed in principle. Now, these are broad agreements, and I recognize that there are a whole lot of details that have to be worked out. But they agreed in principle to negotiate a peace treaty within about a year to declare an official end to the Korean War. This would replace the truce that has kept the uneasy peace for more than 6 decades. In a statement, South and North Korea confirmed the common goal of realizing through complete denuclearization a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. Now, in one sentence, they say twice, complete denuclearization and a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. Now, as far as we know, the United States is honoring agreements and doesn't currently deploy nuclear weapons in the South Korean theater. But the North would be rightfully skeptical of this. And so to negotiate a deal that does require South Korea and its American ally to renounce the placement of nuclear weapons in that zone would be a major accomplishment for Kim Jong-un. Now, will he actually completely disarm? This is a big question, and nobody knows the answer today except maybe little Kim. Now, there were some surprising, candid moments. He said, "I came here to put an end to the history of confrontation." And he also made some startling admissions about the poor road conditions in North Korea and allowed that if Moon makes a visit to the North, that it would be embarrassing to him. He also noted that the North Koreans who were permitted to attend the Olympic Games in February in South Korea all raved about the bullet train in South Korea. Now, these comments you might think really are not so charged, but when you consider the history, that the leaders of North Korea are given godlike status, and of course they promote it themselves, and they never admit that there's anything wrong with their country. And so these are remarkable admissions by Kim in this particular setting. And for his part, the South Korean President Moon, he offered promises that had been made in the past. He renewed them to help improve the North's infrastructure and railroad systems. And of course, the democracy in South Korea has enjoyed great economic progress, and if they're actually willing to share some of that with the North, this could become the basis for a long-term peace agreement that would sharply reduce the tensions and hopefully lead to some forms of reunification. Now, Kim agreed to permit the reunion of families separated by the war. Don't know the details of that, but that is a thaw of major proportions. The leaders also said that within a year, they will push for a trilateral conference with the United States or a four-party forum that would also include China, with the aim of declaring an end to the Korean War and replace the armistice with a peace treaty. Now, skepticism is well warranted here. And I am waiting for the repeated quotation of St. Ronnie Reagan, because somebody fed him the line, "Trust but verify," and he took credit for it. Reagan was always scripted, so I don't believe that anything was original to him. But those are valuable ideas. Trust but verify. And the inspection process for North Korea as it moves toward this promised denuclearization will be a critical aspect of this. Despite all the optimism and positivity, Kim Jong-un said, "As the expectations are high, so is the skepticism. In the past, we had reached big agreements, but they were not implemented for more than 10 years. There are people who are skeptical that the result of today's meeting will be properly implemented." And the real wild card here, unfortunately, is the stable genius in the White House, our dear tweeter. And he is busy trying to keep everybody off base. Will he actually meet with Kim? Will he stay in the meeting room, or will he respectively get up and walk out? And he loves to create this kind of chaos and uncertainty. And frankly, at this stage, I don't think it's helpful. The other aspect here is Trump's huge ego and his desperate need to produce a win and to distract people from all of his scandals, his ethical challenges, and even yesterday's rambling exposure in his nearly 30-minute phone call to Fox and Friends, where he undercut Michael Cohen and may have incriminated himself and destroyed the attorney-client privilege that he has been claiming is so important to him. And because Trump desperately needs to take credit for this, let me first acknowledge that this didn't happen under Obama or Bush or Clinton or Bush 1. And so Trump is going to get some credit for this. And I will begrudgingly say that he's entitled to it. But of course, that's never enough for him. He will want to take all the credit. And my fear is that he will see this as a reward for his bluffing, his bullying, his threats to annihilate North Korea that came from the UN and from his Twitter feed. And so, unfortunately, this is rewarding the worst of Trump's public behavior. And of course, with John Bolton in the mix, and now Pompeo confirmed as Secretary of State, the hawks are in his corner, and he's going to this meeting like a mafia leader who's bringing his heat. He's bringing his muscle. I'm sure that, makes him feel even more confident. And, of course, when Trump is confident, his ignorance always prevails. And that's what I fear may happen in this process. So this is a great day. And as I say, I am very much aware of the pitfalls that remain ahead. And, of course, Trump is busy trying to scuttle the Iranian nuclear deal, which just sets such a bad tone for the efforts to reach some agreement with North Korea. And this morning, of course, Trump licked his wounds, massaged his ego, as I imagine a team of people were trying to wrestle that comb-over hairdo into place with plenty of product. And he hit the Twitter this morning. And despite the great news from the Koreas, he started with another attack on former FBI Director James Comey, who he said is either sick or very dumb. Is everybody believing what is going on? James Comey can't define what a leak is. He illegally leaked classified information but doesn't understand what he did or how serious it is. He lied all over the place to cover it up. He's either very sick or very dumb. Remember Sailor. That's a reference to a guy he pardoned, a sailor who accidentally took a picture of a classified area, I think of a nuclear submarine, and was severely punished for it. But the false claim here is that Comey's memos from his meetings and conversations with Trump are automatically classified because they relate to the president. But Comey, even in one of the documents on February 14th of 2017, wrote, "Because this is an unclassified document, I will be limited in how I describe what I said next." And Comey is correct in that assertion. Now, you're going to hear from Jim Comey in an exchange with Fox News reporter Brett Baer here in just a moment. But the other thing that the president was giddy about today, and of course he tweeted about it, just out, House Intelligence Committee report released. No evidence that the Trump campaign colluded, coordinated, or conspired with Russia. Clinton campaign paid for opposition research obtained from Russia. Wow, a total witch hunt must end now. Trump's trying to tee up Rudy Giuliani, who had a meeting this week with Robert Mueller. We don't know much about it. And he imagines that the work of Devin Nunes, the partially recused chair of the Intelligence Committee, who skewed it to the Republican majority, and this report reflects that. There is a minority dissenting report from the Democrats. The Republicans wrote, while the committee found that several of the contacts between Trump associates and Russians, or their proxies including WikiLeaks, were ill-advised, the committee did not determine that Trump or anyone associated with him assisted Russia's active measures campaign. So the Republicans are trying to split the baby here, saying, oh yeah, Russia had active measures. They were trying to interfere. But there was no consequential engagement by the Trump campaign. And they toss off the Carter Page contact, the Trump Tower meeting with Veselnitskaya. We'll talk about her again in a moment. And of course, this was a highly political effort from the start. The Republicans on the committee did not seriously investigate these issues. They went through the motions, they cherry-picked information favorable to Trump, and they ignored everything else. Now, at the same time, and I hope I don't give you whiplash here, the Democrats ginned up a whole conspiracy theory about Trump and Russia that so far is not supported by any meaningful public evidence. Oh yeah, they're embarrassing comments from Jared Kushner and the gang, and there are circumstantial evidences of inappropriate moves. But it really doesn't amount to a clear-cut case of what has been described as collusion. The Democrats, on their part, say the pattern of deception surrounding these meetings, first denying they took place, then, when discovered, denying their content, and then denying their significance, suggests a consciousness of wrongfulness, if not illegality. What the hell does that mean? All right, they look guilty, they act guilty, but you can't prove that they're guilty. And we've been chasing our tails on this for almost 2 years now. The Democrats also disputed the Republican claims that the January 2017 intelligence assessment was the product of improper tradecraft. Now, I agree with the Republicans here that was a joke. It was full of weasel words, we assert, we assess, with high confidence, but there was no public evidence. And the back end of the intelligence assessment was a stale attack on RT, as if it was a significant media presence here in the United States. And so when the Democrats claim that report had value, I'm sorry, that's bullshit. And so here I navigate between the Democrats and the Republicans here. I find neither party convincing in their presentation of the narrative of Trump-Russia. And from the Washington Post coverage, I have a couple of quotes here. The report asserts that while intelligence officials had concerns about Trump campaign advisor Carter Page in early 2016, the FBI did not give campaign officials a briefing to alert them about their worries. Now, that's a fair comment. The FBI did not provide any such warning about Page, although it was again discussed by the administration's most senior policymakers after Comey briefed the National Security Council principals about the page information in what is quoted as late spring of 2016. Now, with those comments in mind, let's go to the James Comey interview on Fox yesterday with Bret Baier. And I found it very interesting, and I'm going to play portions, pause it, and comment as we listen to Bret Baier and Jim Comey.
Okay, so what is the crime or the collusion that launches the investigation?
Yeah, collusion's not a word that I'm familiar with. I've seen
what
it
is
in
the
media.
crime? What is the evidence, basically, that launches?
The question is, you open a counterintelligence investigation to understand, are any Americans in cahoots with the foreign intelligence activities of an adversary nation?
When the Steele dossier comes out, sometime early July, when did you personally learn about the memos in the dossier?
Sometime in the fall. I don't remember exactly when.
You're talking fall of...
Fall of 16.
Right. So who told you about them?
I don't remember. Someone on my senior staff.
Do you remember how they were described?
I remember they briefed me about it, explained that it came from a reliable source, former Allied intelligence officer. I remember being given a copy of it. I don't know whether it was September, October, sometime in that period of time.
When did you learn that the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign had funded Christopher Steele's work?
Yeah, I still don't know that for a fact.
What do you mean?
I've only seen it in the media. I never knew exactly which Democrats had funded. I knew it was funded first by Republicans, opposed to Donald.
But that's not true.
Now, Comey does fumble this to an extent, but it's important to note that none of us knew who had funded the Steele dossier through Fusion GPS until they revealed it to us in late September of 2017. That was kept secret. The Coy Perkins payoff to Fusion GPS, the alleged, firewall between Christopher Steele, Fusion GPS. The Clinton campaign allegedly didn't know who Christopher Steele was or that he was generating this opposition research. And so, while Comey's about to fumble the answer here, the central notion of when we found out who paid for the dossier and the critical point of when the payment switched from a Republican donor to the Democratic campaign of Hillary Clinton, that's pretty crucial, and that's what Comey fumbles.
I'm sorry?
That's not true. That the dossier that Christopher Steele worked on was funded by Republicans?
My understanding was his work started funded by Oppo Research, funded by Republicans.
So Free Beacon and said that they had Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS on a kind of a retainer, but they did not fund the Christopher Steele memo or the dossier. That was initiated by Democrats.
Baier is correct here. The assignment to Christopher Steele was not made until the transition of the Oppo Research account had shifted from the Free Beacon, a Republican-funded group, digging dirt, I think, for Jeb Bush, or maybe for Ted Cruz, gave up because Trump had secured the nomination.
Okay, my understanding was the activity was begun, that Steele was hired to look into, was first funded by Republicans, then picked up, the important thing was picked up by Democrats opposed to Donald Trump.
So is that why, did you tell President Obama that the dossier was who it was funded by?
No, not to my recollection.
Did you want to know who it was funded by?
I wanted to know what I knew, which is it was funded by people politically opposed to Donald Trump.
Okay.
Which particular opponents wasn't that important
But when
to me.
did you, so you still to this day don't know that it was funded by the DNC or
I've read
the
that in the
Clinton
media,
campaign?
but I don't know for a fact and didn't know while I was at the FBI which exact opponent of the president's funded that.
Okay. How many times did you, and to what extent did you brief President Obama on the dossier?
I didn't ever brief President Obama on the dossier. I was present during a conversation where Director of National Intelligence briefed it to him, as we did to the Gang of Eight and to the President-elect the first week of January.
You called the dossier unverified, salacious. Why did you use that to the FISA court to ask for surveillance for Carter Page? Not only use it, but you led with it. A bulk of that FISA application deals with that dossier. Why?
Yeah, that's not my recollection, Brett. And I don't know that the FISA application has been released.
I think Comey is right about this. I don't know that anyone has seen the FISA application who doesn't have a security clearance.
Recollection was it was part of a broader mosaic of facts that were laid before the FISA judge to obtain a FISA warrant.
You can hear more of the interview between Bret Baier and James Comey. I've linked to the audio file in the podcast, the show file for today's podcast. And as I alluded earlier, her name is Veselnitskaya. I always work over her name. She, of course, is the Russian attorney Natalia Veselnitskaya, who attended that now infamous meeting at Trump Tower. And NBC News is broadcasting an interview today where Veselnitskaya acknowledges that she has had her emails hacked. And it wasn't by Fancy Bear. It was by an exiled Russian oligarch, Khodorkovsky, who is a major opponent of Putin's. And he set up a drop at an organization, and he says that some anonymous source, gosh, maybe it was WikiLeaks, dropped these emails into his lap. So what we're learning is that Veselnitskaya is acknowledging closer ties to the prosecutor general at the Kremlin and says since 2013 I've been actively communicating with the office of the Russian prosecutor general. That conflicts with what she told the Senate Judiciary Committee in a statement last November. So I'm sure that she'll be staying in Russia so that there are no sanctions on her in this regard. Does it materially change things? I don't know. I don't find it compelling. And we will continue to watch this case. And we wait to see what Bob Mueller has that wasn't discovered by the House, or we still await a report from the Senate Intelligence Committee. It's Friday. There are protests in Gaza, and Hamas basically told the Associated Press that they're working on their nonviolent protest skills. That was the advance of today's protest. About 10,000 Palestinians marched along the border security fence with Israel, and 3 of them were killed. There are reports from both the New York Times and by the Israeli liberal newspaper Haaretz that Palestinians rushed the fence. There's a report that 2 of them had handguns. That is disputed, but the idea that people did try to breach the barrier does show up in both reports. In addition to the 3 people killed, the New York Times reported at least 350 others wounded. Haaretz pegs the number much higher at 833 today alone. And they say at least 174 of those were injured by live fire from Israel. This occurred at near the Carney crossing, and the accounts indicate that there was an organized effort to rush the fence, and this resulted in the sniper fire from the Israelis. And the Grizzly Jumbotron shows that as of today, there have been 39 deaths, 5,511 injuries, and 2,600 people have been hospitalized since these protests began about a month ago. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And I went to the P.O. Box yesterday and got a lovely birthday card from my Vice President for Marketing based on the East Coast. That's Del Leonard. And he included a check for $100, told me to go buy some Celebration Spirits, and noted that he has been listening to the Peter B. Collins Podcast now for 10 years. Yes, we began 10 years ago in June. And I am delighted that Del is still along for the ride. I also want to thank Susan Gavet, Candace Brunling, and Abby McMillan. Brunglinger, sorry, Candace, I butchered your name because the printout is a little fuzzy here. Anyway, they're subscribers, and I'd like you to join them. I've still got room for new subscribers here at the PBC Podcast, so just visit peterbcollins.com, pull down on the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber, you hit the sign-up page, and in a couple of minutes, you're good to go with a $5, $10, $20, or a $50 annual subscription. Those are the options. And if you don't like PayPal, you can communicate with me by the good old U.S. mail at Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150-660, San Rafael, 94915. My Yellow Journalism Award this week goes to Robert Mackey at The Intercept. Just listen to this biased headline. Russia brings Syrians to The Hague to make underwhelming case chemical attack was fake. I mean, you don't need to read the article once you just get through that headline. And while I was not in Duma in Syria when the alleged release of a chemical weapon occurred, I am still highly skeptical. And to see this, they pose as being a deep investigative group there at The Intercept, and some of the reporters do great work. I have commented positively on many Intercept reports just in the last few days. But this one is a real stinker. In the governor's race in Ohio, the Democratic primary features Dennis Kucinich, a two-time presidential candidate, and the guy who proposed a Department of Peace, against Richard Cordray, who ran the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and is a former attorney general in Ohio. Cordray is attacking Kucinich because Kucinich recently reported that he received $20,000 for a paid speech in London to what is described as a pro-Assad group. But we don't have any details on that group or why it is known to be pro-Assad. Now, I acknowledge that Kucinich has had appropriate skepticism about the U.S. war plan, about the twin goals of vanquishing Assad and the Islamic State simultaneously. And you can hear his skepticism in my most recent interview with Kucinich, which was just about a year ago, April 17th of 2017. I encourage you to check that out. As a native of Ohio, I can tell you that there are plenty of Buckeyes who will be turned off to Kucinich by this argument. And I'm sorry to see Cordray is using it. Apparently it shows that Kucinich is a real threat to Cordray in this Democratic primary. So the other angle here is that Kucinich has fired back by saying that Cordray will do anything to change the subject from his NRA A rating and his support for assault weapons on the streets of America. I do favor Kucinich in this race, and I hope he does prevail in the upcoming primary. In neighboring Michigan, a state senator who is a Republican also running for governor, his name is Patrick Colbeck. He keeps shooting off his mouth with a lot of hateful commentary about Muslims, and it is aimed at one of his Democratic rivals, should he prevail in the primary, Dr. Abdul El Sayed. So this guy accuses El Sayed's family of having ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, and he hints that he'll impose Sharia law in the Great Lakes state if he is elected governor. These are hateful smears inspired by Donald Trump, and there has been some pushback from fellow Michiganders on these scurrilous attacks. We're learning that Sean Hannity, who told us when it was exposed that he's invested in properties in poverty-stricken areas of Georgia, that he did so because he wanted to invest in communities that badly need such investment. Well, he bought an apartment complex that's funded by a loan from HUD, so there's a lot of Section 8 tenants in there, and since he took over, his property managers, and let's be clear, I don't think Sean Hannity is personally managing these apartments, but the eviction rate has jumped by 400%. There's a great piece at Counterpunch I want to recommend. It's a long read by Eric Draitzer, who is a youngish fellow who I've talked with a few times, and I'm impressed with his work. And he digs into a story that we've been covering for the last few days. The way the leadership of the Democratic Party is not only squeezing out progressives from congressional primary races, but they are openly supporting veterans and intelligence veterans, including a case in upstate New York that deserves your deep attention. This is the case where a guy named Beals, I think it's Jeffrey Beals, is running for Congress as a Bernie-crat. He centers his progressive bona fides to brand himself as one of the inheritors of the progressive torch lit by Sanders. And he describes himself as a former U.S. diplomat, and his campaign a movement for diplomacy and peace in foreign affairs, an end to militarism. But Jeffrey Beals is exposed by Eric Draitzer here as a key CIA operative in Iraq with State Department cover. Fluent in Arabic, he was one of the people who searched for and found the man named Maliki, the puppet that we put into place and who had a very ugly reign in Iraq after we put him there. Beals was very tight with the U.S. Ambassador Khalilzad and a very influential figure, so influential that after ExxonMobil picked up an oil franchise in Kurdistan, that one of his cronies, a guy named Ali Qaderi, offered him a fat paycheck working for ExxonMobil. And Beals, during his campaign, talks about how he rejected working for Exxon because he's committed as a lefty. Then you learn that his campaign is being run by Bennett Ratcliffe, a longtime friend and ally of Hillary Clinton. And then you learn that Ratcliffe was involved in covering up the coup in Honduras a few years ago. And you get plenty of stuff about Beals here and who he really is. But then Draitser notes that the other Democrat running in this campaign, Patrick Ryan, served 2 years in Iraq as an intelligence officer. He's a West Point graduate. And he's tied into Peter Thiel and Palantir. He got involved with H.B. Gary Federal. You may have heard of them. They were hacking a lot of progressives, including my friend Brad Friedman. Ryan was working at a startup called Dataminer, a data analytics company. And Ryan is backed by right-wing elements of the Democratic Party and the New Democrat Coalition PAC, a conservative pro-business element of the party. And in closing his article, Eric Draitser cites the work of Patrick Martin, the guy from the World Socialist website we interviewed over a month ago, who first tipped us to this recruitment of military veterans and intelligence veterans for the crop of Democratic freshman hopefuls running for Congress this year. And finally, for your weekend enjoyment, I'm releasing an in-depth interview with a farmer and activist from northern Iowa whose name is Howard Vlieger. And I interviewed him recently for my local cable TV show. And I'm sharing that interview because I learned so much from Howard about studying the soil, about the impact of pesticides, genetic modified organisms, the drive for organic farming. He's really a well-informed activist who has helped some of the battles to promote GMO labeling at the state level. And I think you'll find the conversation very interesting. Here's a quick excerpt from our in-depth interview with Howard Vlieger.
So I started studying GMOs in 1994. And, everything was promised to us on a silver plate. So we looked at it objectively instead of euphorically. And when the seed company provided the BT corn the first year, which was 1997, we did a side-by-side comparison.
And for non-farmers, BT stands for?
Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a hybrid that has an active insecticide in it that if corn borer were to bite that plant, it would kill the corn borer. Mm-hmm. And all BT hybrids are registered as an insecticide with EPA. So you're basically growing an insecticide.
And we then harvest insecticides and put them on the table.
Oh yeah, but don't worry, that all doesn't show up. It doesn't. You got to listen to the commercials. There's no problems with this. Science has proven otherwise, of course.
My interview with Howard Vlieger is available for subscribers today at iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, and just about everywhere you can find the Peter B. Collins podcast. Thanks for listening. Feel free to share this podcast. And we posted on YouTube. Yesterday we had a few glitches, but I think we got them under control. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.